Hello everyone, well it's the Western Bulldogs versus Essendon this week, Saturday night at Marvel Stadium. It's a big game. The Bombers and the Bulldogs are both doing well at the moment. It's a bit of a local derby. We're going to talk all about that game right now. So apologies if I do sound a little bit nasally. I've been working through a bit of a nasty cold. You know how it is. It does tend to happen to everybody during this time of year at some point. But anyway, it's the Western Bulldogs versus the Bombers, and I always enjoy these games. I'm from the western suburbs myself, so I know a lot of Bulldogs fans. It's a bit of a local derby of sorts, the old Battle of the Maribyrnong and all that. Historically, we hold the edge on them. We've won 96-69 with 2 draws, but the Bulldogs have had the edge on us recently. They've won 9 of the last 11. And a lot of those weren't close. We really struggled against Bevo for a long time, but we did win the last match that we played against the Western Bulldogs last year in about round 6 or so. So that does give us some encouragement. But just looking at the teams, there's going to be a lot of changes from the last time we played the Bulldogs to this one. If you look at our lineup last time, these were the players who played in the match against the Bulldogs last year, the last time we played them, who didn't play against Sydney last week. So I'm using last week's lineup as a gauge, right? Heppel, Menzies, Kelly, Parrish, Jones, Alwyn Davey Jr., Cox, Laverty, Draper, and Stringer. And the ins, at least based on last week's game. I know this won't be exactly accurate for this week's game because Lewis Hayes obviously won't be playing this week. But the ins last week that were changes from that are, Sardell Hooley, Setterfield, Archie Roberts, Pryor, Perkins, Lewis Hayes, Archer Daywicks, Caddy, Kako, and Reed. So just looking at that, you probably would expect Laverty to come in for Lewis Hayes, which means that there's probably nine differences between the last time we played the Western Bulldogs, and they have some changes as well. These are the players that played for the Western Bulldogs in the round 6 game last year who didn't play last week. You got Liam Jones, Jamara Ugle-Hagan, Sam Darcy, Taylor Duray, Treloar, Gallagher, McRae, of course he's at St Kilda now, Waitman, Oscar Baker, and the players who played in last week's game against the Gold Coast, and who will likely play this week against Essendon. Bailey Dale, Rory Lobb, Cleary, Davidson, Poulter, Freya, McNeil, Harms, and Kennedy. So there's a lot of changes for both teams compared from the last time they played. So even though we did win by 29 points, I'm not really sure there's too much we can take away from that, other than the bit of confidence, I suppose, that you get when you know that you beat a team last time you played them. So just looking at a lot of the numbers, a few of the numbers against the Western Bulldogs, kicks, handballs, disposals are actually pretty even. I mean, they're one of the teams that, like us, is a high possession team. You can see from the numbers, disposal efficiency is about even. They have a lot more inside 50s than us, and we're going to get into the details of the inside 50 differential. Because it's all very well to look at inside 50s. You can see there they are 57 per game, we have 47 per game. But if they are 57 per game and their opponents, every time they play them, also have 57 per game, it's not really much of an advantage for them. It is an advantage for them, it turns out, because they have the second best inside 50 difference in the competition. But we're going to get into those differences in a minute. Rebound 50s are about the same. Metres per disposal, this is an area that we probably are inefficient in. The Bulldogs are a little bit better at us than this. Contested possessions is an area that we have excelled at for a lot of the year. I think it's kind of an inefficient way to excel, because I think you're putting a lot of effort into one of those areas of the ground that scores don't necessarily come from. But nevertheless, contested possessions, we are plus 4.1 per game. Clearances, we are down a little bit compared to the Bulldogs. They are plus 4.9. We are plus 2. We take a few more marks than them, given we're a much higher possession team. Marks inside 50. The Dogs have one more than us per game. And most of the other stats, to be honest, are pretty even. You can see there they score a lot more goals per game than we do. That is an area that has been that we have struggled in recent times. It's a good thing that our defence has held up Our defence, the last 6 scores we've conceded, 60, 57, 75, 107, 62 and 63, which is among the best in the competition. So the defence is really winning the game for us at the moment because we're not scoring more than about 11 goals a game. We didn't get out of the 60s against North Melbourne. We barely scored 70 points against the Sydney Swans. So we're probably going to need to score, I would anticipate, 13 goals to give us a chance, I reckon, in this game. I think we're probably going to need to score 13 goals. At the moment, we're not really looking like that. That's probably what is going to be required if we're going to win this game. But look, our defence is holding down the fort for Essendon at the moment and is delivering us the 4 points each week. That is really what is happening. The offence is really inefficient and is not really delivering. It's a good thing in the first half last week that we kicked 9 goals, 1. Because had we not been efficient, we would have been in all sorts of trouble. So just having a look at a couple of the stats that are highly advantageous or disadvantageous for both teams, because that is really, to me, I find that more interesting when you look at, which areas are we really good at compared to them, or are they really good at compared to us. So the big difference is inside 50 differential. The Bulldogs have +9 per game, which puts them second in the competition. They average 9 more than their opposition. We are -5, and that puts us 14th. So that is just one area there that we need to get a little bit better at. I know Brad Scott, and some people have brought this up in the comments, and I'm fully aware of this. Brad Scott has actually said this in press conferences, that Essendon is, last year was a high inside 50 team, but we were inefficient, and they're working on, maybe having less inside 50s, but being a bit more careful when they go inside. And that's all good, but it's kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit. That's the only thing. We're probably being a little bit more efficient, but we're not quite getting it in there as much. I still think we need to, move the ball a little bit quicker. But anyway, that's for the coaching staff to figure out. Metres gained difference. This is a fascinating number because Essendon, being one of the top couple of high possession teams in the competition, you'd think metres gained would be a huge advantage. But we are actually -243 compared to the opposition per game. The opposition actually gain more metres than we do, despite the fact that we have more of the ball than they do. So we are -243, which puts us 15th. And the Bulldogs are +192, which puts them at number 5 in the competition. So I think this is something that we need to work on. Inefficiency is a killer, and it will eventually come to bite us on the bum. Contested possession difference, we are +4.1. Bulldogs are +1.1 compared to their opponents each week. Uncontested difference is kind of similar. Essendon +22.6, the Bulldogs +19.3. Post-clearance contested possessions, this is an area that we are much better at than they are. Essendon are 4th in the competition at post-clearance contested possession at +5.0. The Bulldogs are -2.1. The Bulldogs' centre clearances difference are first. They are +4.8 in the competition. We are around the middle. We are 11th at -0.4. So this is an area this is probably, at least statistically, this is the area that they dominate and are the best in the competition at. They are number 1 at the Bulldogs at centre clearance differential. So it's a big job for Todd Goldstein in there and Zach Merritt and the team. But if we can get an edge on them in that particular area, that will go a long way towards us winning this game. So the question you all want to know is, can the Bombers actually win this game? Can we beat the Bulldogs? Well, yes, we can win it. Absolutely, we can win this game. I don't necessarily think we will win it, all right? But we are capable of winning this game. But we're going to need to do a lot right, and especially we're going to need to do a lot right in the coach's box. And we may need a little bit of luck as well. I mean, the Bulldogs are just about the best team going around at the moment, or pretty close to it. So the first thing is, don't get beaten by what you know. So we can't let their best players dominate. So we're going to need to make sure that Marcus Bontempelli is, we put the clamps on him a little bit. You can't totally stop these players. Ed Richards is the other one. People don't realise Ed Richards is actually one of the top 5 players in the competition this year, according to Champion Data. He is absolutely gunning it. You don't necessarily think of him on the same level of, your Zach Merritt or your Nick Dacos or Sarong, these sort of players, but his output is extraordinary. So we need to put the clamps down on their best players. Our defence needs to continue to do their job. Zach Reed has been amazing down there. Zach Reed has not conceded a goal from his direct opponent for 6 weeks. Can you believe it? The last time he conceded a goal to his direct opponent was when Darcy Fogarty for Adelaide kicked the goal in the rout that Adelaide gave us earlier in the season. Since then, Zach Reed has not conceded a goal. And our defence, what they have been doing is closing up space really well. The ball comes in there and you watch them, everyone seems to converge. You might have noticed the video I had of the match review. That was my, I used a lot of footage overlaid on that video, the match review of the Sydney game, where I was up in the stands in the third level. And I can tell you from that vantage point, when the ball hits the ground in the defensive area, everyone from the Essendon team sort of closes ground, right? There's very, very little space for the opposition at the moment to be able to get clean possessions in their inside 50. So, we're going to have to make sure that, Norton and players like that, Tim English, are not able to take contested marks. Matthew Kennedy, the former Carlton player, kicked 3 goals last week. We can't allow someone like that to get off the leash and kick 3 goals again. He's been a good player down there, but we just can't allow a small forward to kick 3 goals. So everybody's going to have to do their job. But importantly, we're just going to have to learn to score more. And it's easier said than done. Anyone can just come on here and just say, well, we need to score more. Well, of course we do, right? But how do you do that? I've always said I just think we need to move the ball quicker. I think we need to take that first option. There were a couple of times where we tried to spot up a player inside 50 last week. We saw it, and I reckon they could have pulled the trigger on kicking the ball to that player like a second earlier. I remember there was a time where I think it was Martin or Perkins. I think it might have actually been Perkins, was on his own, and the player in question tried to kick it to him. Good decision. But I reckon he could have made the decision about a second earlier. I reckon he delayed. I reckon they've got to be a little bit more instinctive when they're going forward. They're being so careful to pick out the correct option that they're taking the instinct out of the game. If you play with a little bit more instinct, within reason, right? You don't want to throw the game plan out, but you play with a little bit more instinct, then you're probably going to take those options in the forward 50 when you're kicking it in there a little bit quicker. And that extra second or half second is all the difference. Because it's very, very difficult to get marks inside 50. Your marks inside 50 are gold. That's a shot at goal. And it's one thing I've noticed last week, that we're not quite as instinctive as what I think we ought to, or we need to be. Because at the end of the day, 11 goals isn't going to cut it. And look, to be honest, it's not going to cut it against Richmond the week after if we kick 11 goals, right? We're going to need to kick more goals than that. So look, it's going to be a big ask. It's going to be a big ask. The Bulldogs are a better team than us at the moment. They're playing better. But look, we will put in a good performance. I think we've been a solid team for 5 or 6 weeks now. The defence is holding up well enough that I don't think it'll be a blowout. I mean, can they get off the leash and win by 4 or 5 goals? Yeah, they could. But I think our defence is holding up well enough that I don't think the Bulldogs will win by 10 goals or anything like that, just because we're being so restrictive at the moment. So who's going to come into the team? Well, I think Laverde will probably come in for Lewis Hayes. I know a lot of you might not want that. Laverde can divide opinion. Look, he had 32 possessions in the VFL last week, and he's been playing pretty well in the VFL. And at the end of the day, look, we need to bring in a like for like, and Laverde is probably the obvious option. He's been in good form in the reserves, so he just seems to be the obvious option. Sardis had 39 possessions in the VFL over the weekend. I would probably bring in him for probably Archer Day Wicks, I think. Look, you'd love to just give everyone a game, but at some point you've just got to make the decision. And I think Sardis's form was such over the weekend that he deserves a promotion into the senior team. And I would personally bring Sardis in for Archer Day Wicks. So I think there'll be probably the 2 changes. I would love to see Zach Johnson get a run. Zach Johnson was the emergency, was third emergency last week, so he's close. He's getting close, guys. We always talk about Zach Johnson on this channel, and we've talked about it a lot. I've watched him pretty closely in the VFL, and third emergency, he's getting closer and closer to that senior spot. And the more injuries that pile up, the more chance there is. It's interesting with the injuries as well, guys. I was just looking at it, and I don't want to cry foul with injuries and use them as an excuse. With Draper and Bryan out, it affects our depth. But that we've obviously brought in as a replacement for those, Goldstein and Wright. And look, let's face it, Peter Wright was on the outer this year. He was. Peter Wright was not expected to play much this year, and it was expected during the year that he would be spending a lot of the year in the reserves and probably wouldn't be playing senior football. And he's done pretty well. He's come into the team. But if you think about it, Draper and Nick Bryan being replaced by Goldstein and Wright, that's not that much of a that's not that much of a downgrade. All right? That's not that much of a downgrade. All right, Goldstein and Wright are pretty good, and they're not that much worse. They might even be as good as, but they're not that much worse than Draper and Bryan. So really, even though we are missing a couple of key ruckmen and it affects our depth, I don't think it actually has affected us that much. Just because, let's face it, Goldstein and Wright are pretty reasonable players, okay? Ridley is a loss, but Lewis Hayes was doing the job last week. He had 16 possessions before he went off, and Laverty isn't at Ridley's quality. We know that. But I do think, if you look at our team, we do tend to be getting injuries in areas that we have cover in. And that's not, it's not good to get injuries, of course. But I don't think injuries are necessarily an excuse at the moment, because the players that we've brought in to replace these other players are actually performing pretty well and are playing at a reasonable level, like Goldstein and Wright, of course. So what do I think is going to happen in this game? Well, my prediction is a 4-goal win to the Western Bulldogs. I think we can win. I think if we played our best and everybody does their job and we keep Bontempelli under control and all that, we are capable of winning this game at best. But if you're to be honest and we're to be realistic, you have to tip the Bulldogs in this game. They're playing really well. They're one of the best teams in the competition. They play well at Marvel Stadium, as we do, but they play well there. And I'm tipping the Bulldogs to win by 4 goals in this match. What do you guys think? Is there anything I've missed? Please let me know. Let me know in the comments what your opinion is about the match, about the potential changes in the match, about the potential list, inclusions, ins and outs. I'd like to know. Have a discussion in the comments. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Have a great day, everybody. And as always, go Bombers!